Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the campus of Georgetown University for another in a series of provocative and probing conversations on religious freedom, sponsored by the Religious Freedom Project of Georgetown's Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. I'm Tom Farr, Visiting Associate Professor of International Affairs at Georgetown School of Foreign Service and Director of the Religious Freedom Project. Today, as you know, we're going to have a conversation on religious liberty with Pastor Rick Warren. And Rick, you can see we have assembled here a very diverse and vigorous crowd. I see in our audience, I saw as they were coming in, students and faculty from not only from Georgetown, but from universities throughout the area. I've seen officials from the State Department, the Department of Defense, the CIA, Department of Justice, and the Homeland Security. I've seen representatives from the magnificent group of NGOs around this city, from synagogues and mosques and churches and other NGOs. So we're just delighted to have you with us today. In a moment, I'll introduce my colleague, Tim Shah, who will introduce Pastor Warren a bit more formally and moderate the discussion with him. So please get ready. We're going to involve you in the discussion as well. But before I introduce Tim, I'd like to say a brief word about the Religious Freedom Project. When you came in, you were given a brochure that will give you some of the details about our work. I also invite you to visit our website where you can watch videos and check out the scholars that we have, read some of their articles and appearances around the country and around the world and their exciting work on religious freedom. And if you haven't already done so, please sign up for our newsletters and for announcements of special events such as this one. The work of the Religious Freedom Project is based on two propositions. The first is that religious liberty is important for individuals, whether they are believers or not, important for the health of every society, and important for the success of every state. Religious freedom is the right to believe or not, and the right to live in accordance with one's most deeply held religious convictions. Without that right, no human being can be said to be living a fully human life. When any state fails to protect that right and to protect it equally for all of its citizens, both history and social science strongly suggest that state will fail. And it doesn't matter whether it's an authoritarian regime or a democracy. Our second proposition is that religious freedom is in global crisis. Comprehensive reports by the Pew Research Center say that 75% of the world's population lives in countries where religious freedom is either highly or very highly restricted. Millions of human beings are subjected to violent persecution because of their religious beliefs and practices or those of their tormentors. Among the victims, Christians are the most likely victims, and Muslims come in a close second. While most of the severe persecution takes place outside the West, neither Europeans nor Americans can afford to be complacent. Social hostility toward religion is rising faster in Europe than any other region of the world. And here in America, where religious liberty has long been considered the first freedom of our Constitution and our history, both social hostility and government restrictions on religion are on the rise, according to the Pew reports. Whether you are religious or not, you should be alarmed at those trends. You should want to know more. And that's where the Religious Freedom Project comes in. Our job is to tell you more. When you come to our public events or private seminars, when you read our books, articles, op-eds, or go to our webpage, we want to make you think about religious freedom. What does it mean for you, for your personal beliefs, for your family, for your work, for your country? What does religious freedom mean for American democracy? Does it have a special status in our Constitution? And if so, why? Should religious worship and public religious expression have any more protection than environmentalism or same-sex marriage? What about China or Iran or Saudi Arabia or Egypt? Is it in the strategic interest of the United States to advance religious freedom in those countries and other countries around the world? Is there any evidence that religious freedom has a positive impact on economic growth and alleviation of poverty? on women's rights, social harmony, on the longevity and stability of democracy itself. Well, we brought Pastor Warren here to Georgetown to discuss these and other issues, and as I say, to help you know more about religious freedom, its meaning and its value. To conduct this conversation with Pastor Warren, there's no one better suited than my friend and colleague Tim Shah, the Associate Director of the Religious Freedom Project. Tim is the author of many books and articles relevant to this subject, but I want to cite one in particular, which I happen to know Pastor Warren has read, and it was celebrated at one of our events last year. It's entitled appropriately, Religious Freedom, Why Now? Now there's a good question. To help us answer that question, please welcome again Pastor Rick Warren and Professor Tim Shah.
Thank you. Thank you. This is quite a crowd here, Rick. It looks like a mega church, not like Georgetown University. Thank you, Tom, and thank you so much, Rick, for being with us. Good afternoon to all of you. As we start our proceedings today, I want to underline how excited we are in the Religious Freedom Project to be having this conversation. There are many reasons why we're excited. First reason has been well articulated by Tom Farr just now. That is, we are excited about the issue of religious freedom. We care about it in part because religious freedom is in crisis, as Tom Farr has just said. 75% of the world's people live in countries where there are severe restrictions on religious freedom. But we're excited about the issue also because we believe the issue of religious freedom contains a hopeful message for societies around the world. Since 2011, we in the Religious Freedom Project have conducted a variety of different kinds of research across the social sciences, and we believe there is striking evidence that religious freedom contains a message of hope, that when societies care enough about religious freedom to protect that right for everyone, that this promotes the well-being of every community and every society that puts into practice. When societies are careful to build an environment of religious freedom for all of their people, something exciting happens. They tend to reap a wide range of benefits, including political stability, democracy, a robust civil society, economic prosperity and development, and more effective care for the poor. This is the issue that is going to become the increasing focus of the Religious Freedom Project in the coming years, and this is the issue we're going to discuss today. Does religious freedom help societies flourish? Does the freedom of religious individuals and institutions to put their faith into practice make a difference to the economic and political well-being of real human beings, especially the world's poorest and most vulnerable human beings? Tonight, the President of the United States will be delivering the State of the Union. But our question is this: can we really talk about the state of our union or the state of any political community anywhere without talking about the state of our religious freedom? Can any society be thought strong or sound or healthy without robust religious freedom for every human being, regardless of who they are and regardless of what they believe? So we are excited to talk about this issue. We're also excited because of you, because of this wonderful, diverse audience. The Religious Freedom Project exists to generate open conversations like this with audiences like all of you gathered here, so we're delighted that all of you are here. And in a few minutes, we'll be inviting you to join the conversation. And finally, we're excited about our special guest, Pastor Rick Warren. We are delighted that Rick Warren is engaging this issue of religious freedom with all of his passion and powers of persuasion. It cannot be said emphatically enough that Rick Warren brings so much to the issue of religious freedom. He brings so much to the broader issue of the proper place of faith in public life and the particular issue of how freedom for all people of all faiths and people of no faith is a crucial ingredient in the flourishing of societies everywhere. Not everyone will agree with Rick Warren about the role of faith in public life. Not everyone will agree with him about religious freedom, but there is hardly anyone better qualified to catalyze a more vigorous national conversation about this issue. One thing Rick Warren brings to this issue is that he is a pastor and religious leader of enormous experience and dedication. For more than 30 years, 32 years, I think, Rick Warren has served as pastor of Saddleback Church in California. If you don't know about Saddleback Church, it's where weekly attendance averages over 20,000 people. And I gather more like around 25,000 in the last couple of weekends. And thanks to Rick Warren, Saddleback Church is a place that is a hub of activity not just on Sundays. It has spawned a huge variety of ministries to the community. Furthermore, Saddleback has become a high-profile forum for important, constructive conversation about faith, about public life, the common good, and global issues such as HIV/AIDS and poverty. A second thing Rick Warren brings to the issue is that he is an extraordinarily accomplished author and passionate communicator. Rick Warren's 2002 book, which just celebrated its 10th anniversary of publication, The Purpose-Driven Life, has sold 32 million copies in hardback, and it has been translated into more than 50 languages. That makes The Purpose-Driven Life the #1 best-selling hardback in American history. That's right, the #1 best-selling hardback, not to mention the #2 most translated book in world history, second only to the Bible. Rick, I didn't want to talk about how many books I've sold, by the way. I didn't want you to feel bad, so we're not going to talk about that.
Thank you.
I didn't want God to feel bad either, right? He's the author of the Bible. So I could go on for a while, but I will mention just one more thing that Rick Warren brings to this issue, and that is that he is an incredibly innovative and creative social entrepreneur. I guess you could say he's a purpose-driven social entrepreneur. Along with his wife, Kay, Rick Warren has poured his own resources, his own time, hundreds of thousands of miles of travel, traveling to some 164 countries, if I remember correctly from earlier today.
That's true.
Into developing innovative solutions to social problems all over the world. With the proceeds from The Purpose-Driven Life, Rick launched a massive global outreach effort in 2005 that merges spiritual and humanitarian work. It is known as the Peace Plan, P-E-A-C-E, because it promotes reconciliation, equips servant leaders, assists the poor, cares for the sick, and educates the next generation. This plan has drawn widespread praise from Hillary Clinton to Bono to Billy Graham. Among the countries where the Peace Plan has had the biggest impact is Rwanda. There, new healthcare initiatives have been launched, working closely with churches, and there too, at the invitation of Rwandan President Paul Kagame, Rick sits on a special presidential advisory council, along with Tony Blair and Michael Porter of the Harvard Business School and others. So Rick Warren, with all that you have done to promote the fruitful involvement of faith in public life all around the world, with the purpose of advancing peace and societal flourishing, we're honored to have you lead this conversation about one of the great issues of our time, religious freedom.
I can't wait to hear what I'm going to say.
Welcome to Georgetown, Rick.
Thank you.
To start off, I want to ask something that may be on the minds of people sitting out there. Let's face it, you're not known for religious freedom. You're known as a pastor, you're known as the Purpose-Driven Life author, you're known as the architect of the Peace Plan, but people don't associate you with this issue. Why right now are you so eager to talk about religious freedom?
Great. Well, first let me say thank you everybody for showing up. Appreciate you being here. It says a whole lot more about you than it does either Tim or myself, because it says that this issue matters to you. And it is an extremely important matter that we're talking about. The protection and defense of religious liberty in a pluralistic, not relativistic, but pluralistic world. And I thank you for coming here. I honor you for being here. I see a lot of friendly faces. This is my second time to be on this stage here at Georgetown. The last time I was here, I spoke on faith and globalization. And we talked about that and at the guest of Dr. DeGioia. And so I'm glad to be back here. And I want to just point out my dear friend, Os Guinness. Dr. Guinness has had a strong influence on me. Hi, Oz. Good to see you. Oz he has written some of the best books on this very subject, the issue of civility, the issue of the Christian faith in a pluralistic world, and the issues of the freedoms, particularly the first freedom, the freedom of religion. Why this and why now? The last 10 years, I haven't been that visible here in America because I spent most of the last 10 years in little villages overseas you've never heard about. I came back. I did do a prayer for the Bush inauguration, and then 4 years later for the Obama inauguration, so I was in town for that. But most of the time, if I wasn't at my church, I've been overseas testing this peace plan. And we've sent over 17,000 of our members to every single nation of the world, all 196. That's 2 more than the UN. The only 2 nations not in the UN are Kosovo and Taiwan. And we made a decision that Jesus said, go to every nation. So we said, why don't we be the first church to go to every nation? And I've sent over 17,000 of my members to promote reconciliation, equip leaders, assist the poor, care for the sick, educate the next generation in those countries. And that's where I was. And that's really how this came about. Because as Tom Farr mentioned earlier, about 75% of the world lives in highly restricted or severely restricted religious liberty countries. The freedoms we have here in America, we're going to talk about some of them that are decaying and some of them that are being limited, but still, this is the freest country when it comes to religious liberty, and we have to protect that. But much of the world, you're not able to do what you want to do. Now, let me just start off by saying, what is religion? Let's start with that before we go into what is religious liberty. But religion is being able to practice, freedom of religion is being able to practice what I believe and value and convert. That is religious liberty. To be able to practice, not just believe, but to actually practice what I believe. And what is religion? Well, let's start off first off and say this. Religion is far more than worship. If religion was simply worship, you could leave your religion at the door of the temple, the mosque, the church, or whatever. But if you are truly a religious person, regardless of what your religion is, it's going to affect every area of your life. It affects how you spend your time. It affects how you run your business. It affects how you spend your money. It affects how you educate your children. Religion is not something that you can compartmentalize and leave it at a church door or at a temple door or any other door. If you are genuinely religious, it infects and infiltrates every area of your life. So religious freedom has to be allowed in every area of your life, not simply at the moment of worship. There are people today who would like to redefine the freedom of religion as the freedom of worship. But that's not what the Constitution guarantees. It guarantees far more than the freedom of worship. It guarantees the freedom for me to practice my faith. But I also add the freedom of religion is also the freedom to convert. I've been in many, many countries where you would say, well, you have religious freedom to do whatever you want to do as long as it's behind closed doors. And if I'm Jewish, I can have my Jewish services behind closed doors. Syria would be a good example of this. I've been in Syria. On that count, if you were a Christian, you could worship Jesus in your church. And if you're Jew, you could worship, Yahweh in the synagogue. But you're not free to convert. If it's just you're free to worship behind closed doors, then Saudi Arabia has religious freedom. But it's far more than that. And so I think it's important when we talk about religious freedom, we realize that it's far more than worship. The Bible says in James, pure religion, true and undefiled, is to care for widows and orphans and keep yourself unspotted from the world. In other words, private purity and public charity. And so this has implications. The Bible says that twice it says that Jesus went into every village preaching, teaching, and healing. Preaching, teaching, and healing. So 1/3 of Jesus' ministry was health care. 1/3 of Jesus' ministry was education. Preaching would be evangelization. Teaching would be education. And healing would be health care. It's not an accident. You can go into any country in the world. The first hospital and the first school were started by Christian missionaries because we have a preaching, teaching, and healing faith. That's my faith. And so my religion doesn't just cover worship. It covers health care. It covers education. And so, in fact, the church invented the hospital. Most people don't know that. The Christian church invented the hospital. We invented it. And so let's talk about freedom over the whole spectrum, not just simply freedom of worship.
I want to read a statement you released about religious freedom not too long ago. The force of the statement may surprise some people. Just a few weeks ago, you wrote, "I predict that the battle to preserve religious liberty for all, in all areas of life, will become the civil rights movement of this decade." Why do you think religious liberty is emerging as a big issue right now? And why does it deserve to be the civil rights movement of the decade?
Well, I learned this from Oz. Freedom is extremely fragile. It never, ever lasts unless you protect it, preserve it, defend it. And we lose our freedoms three ways. We lose them through the fear of threat, and so we give up our security. We yield our freedom because we want to be secure. Or we become neglectful of it. We don't realize its importance. Or we license it away where it becomes anarchy, and everything is so free, and you just totally lose it all. Franklin said it is the responsibility of every generation to preserve the freedoms. And so each generation has to pass it on. And we are seeing in 1,000 different ways little bites at the first freedom. The freedom that we have, the freedom of religion, actually comes from three different areas. First, it comes from the nature of man, human nature. God gave us the freedom to choose. So rather than being driven by instinct, we make moral choices. And since God gives me the freedom to choose what I believe, God doesn't even force me to love Him. He gives me the choice to love Him or reject Him. He gives me the choice to obey Him or disobey Him. If God gives me that choice, then I owe you that choice. And you owe me that choice. It's part of human nature that because God has given this ability to choose, then I have the freedom to choose. The founders and the framers understood this. It's an inalienable right. Religious freedom is not the right that the state gives us. It's a right given to us by God. It is an inalienable right. It is a universal right. It is a right because I am a human being, and God gave me that freedom to make choices. We, as the Constitution says, we are endowed by our Creator. So the first reason we have freedom is because of the nature of man. The second reason we need religious freedom is because of the nature of faith. It's not faith if you're forced. I believe in conversion. I do not believe in coercion. It's not faith if you're forced. Faith has to be a choice. God gives me that choice. And as I said, God doesn't force me to love Him. In fact, even in the Bible, in Revelation 3:20, Jesus says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. And if any man opens the door, I will come in to him and sup with him and fellowship with him." Even God doesn't force Himself into my life. So the nature of faith, it's not faith unless I have the freedom to make that choice. And what we have today is that a lot of people are so afraid of coercion, they are opposed to persuasion. Those are two very, very different issues. Persuasion is a good thing. And in the free market of ideals and ideas and values and religions, what we believe is that in a pluralistic society, everybody had a right to the table and may the best idea win. And you should have the freedom to try to persuade me to be a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew or an atheist or, for that matter, anything else. You should have that freedom to be able, and I should have the freedom to say no. And I should have the same freedom to be able to say back to you, I think my idea is better. Here's my rationale for my worldview. Here's my reasons. And so there's the faith, there's the nature of man, and then there's the nature of salvation and faith. But the third reason why it's important is because it's guaranteed by the Constitution. In America, freedom of religion is not just some minor issue. It's the most important issue in the Constitution. It's the first words of the first phrase of the first paragraph of the First Amendment. It comes before freedom of speech. It comes before freedom of the press. It comes before the freedom to assemble. It comes before the right to bear arms. It is the first freedom. It's the founding freedom. People came to America for this number one freedom. We have two sets of founders. We have our Pilgrim Fathers and we have our political fathers. Both of them were committed to religious freedom. We know the quotes of Washington and the quotes of Jefferson and all these guys. Whether they're Christians or not is irrelevant. What matters is they were committed to this idea of no state church, but also government doesn't interfere with the church. And the free exercise clause is just as important as the establishment clause. And the establishment clause is really to protect all of the minority religions, which were all there. And so this is the first freedom, and actually it's fundamental because it actually determines all the other freedoms. If I don't have the right to believe what I want to believe, then freedom of speech is irrelevant. I don't need it. If I don't have the freedom to believe what I want to believe, freedom of assembly is irrelevant. If I don't have the right to believe what I want to believe, freedom of the press is irrelevant. This is the foundational freedom of America. And it is so important that we can't let anybody start tearing it away little by little.
You mentioned a moment ago, I want to now take you from the American context and the Founding Fathers and now take you to Rwanda.
Sure.
And I want to explore further this connection that we were talking about a moment ago between religious freedom and the well-being of society. You mentioned that religious freedom, partly as an issue, emerged from your work on the peace plan. Of course, you know Rwanda particularly well. You've made countless trips there over the last 10 years, uncountable. How many trips have you made to Rwanda?
I have no idea.
In the last 10 years, since 2000. And you've not only spent a lot of time in Rwanda, but you've intimately been involved with the approach to governance and reform adopted by the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, since you sit on its Presidential Advisory Council. And how long have you served on the Presidential Advisory Council?
5 years.
5 years. So given all your experience, you understand more than almost anybody that Rwanda has experienced some amazing changes in terms of development, in terms of fighting poverty, in terms of fighting corruption. And also you've seen that churches are playing an important role in that progress.
It's the only country I've been in that I've never been asked for a bribe. That says something. It's the only country I've ever been in where I've never been asked for a bribe. Because there's a zero tolerance for corruption.
And it's a place where I gather that in the last 5 years, something like 1 million Rwandans have been lifted out of poverty. 10%, 1 million people out of a population of 10 million have been lifted out of poverty.
46 to 36%.
Healthcare is expanding, access to healthcare, the list goes on. From your experience, tell us about the progress you've seen in Rwanda since you first started traveling there, the before and the after, as it were. And then, this is crucial, describe how religious institutions have played a role in some of the changes that you've seen in Rwanda.
The reason I ended up in Rwanda, we were looking for a very small country where we could make a major impact, like drop a big rock in a little puddle. We're doing the peace plan in every country, but we said, could we find one place that would be a national model? And we actually weren't looking at Rwanda. We were looking at Haiti, we were looking at Namibia, a number of smaller countries. And I got a letter one day from the president. He said, I saw your book, Purpose-Driven Life, and I read it. And I'm a man of purpose. Would you come help us build a nation on purpose? No. So sure. So I went and found it, and I discovered there's a lot of negative things coming out about Rwanda right now, which I don't have time to go into, but let me just say, there's a lot of biased press because the people who supported the genociders still support the genociders, and they happen to be in the Congo right now. And also, France wasn't too excited that Rwanda decided to become an English-speaking country instead of Francophone country, and there's a natural reluctance there, too. So there's other issues involved. But I noticed a couple things about that country, and that is how, in 1994, 1 million people were killed in 100 days through the genocide. And today, when you go to that country, here's a family that this family killed everybody in this family, except for one or two, and they're living next to each other in peace and harmony. And I'm going, how is that possible? Every time I go to the Middle East, I see ghettoization, I see barbed wire going up, walls, bottle rockets. They're no closer to Middle East peace than they were 75 years ago. I'm going, what did this guy know and how to get people who were killing each other 15 years ago to actually live in peace? It's kind of interesting, a little background on this. Paul Kagame actually lost his home. There were actually 3 genocides in Rwanda. And in the second genocide, earlier in the 60s, his family was displaced to Uganda. And so he grew up, and his best friend, Paul Rugira, in a refugee camp in Uganda. And make a long story short, they decided, you know, if we're ever going to get our country back, we're probably going to have to fight for it. And they joined the Ugandan army. Paul Rugira and Kagame had such character, they immediately rose to number 2 and number 3 in the Ugandan army, even though they weren't Ugandans. America saw leadership capability in Kagame and brought him to Fort Leavenworth for leadership training. While he was in leadership training, the genocide broke out. Kagame said, we're not ready to do anything, but we got to at least go in and stop the genocide. So his ragtag band of freedom fighters came in and in 100 days ended the genocide. And then Kagame did 2 things that I've never seen any other world leader do, and I know a lot of world leaders. Number 1, he said, there will be no retaliation. You go into a country, you go into a city, and here's your mom, your dad, your mom's been beaten, your dad's been killed, your sister's been raped, and 17 of your brothers are killed, and the guy who did it is standing there, and you got the gun. What are you going to do? Kagame said, we believe in the rule of law. You may not retaliate. In fact, I've heard him say many, many times, the leaders must absorb the pain. If you do an eye for an eye, you just keep fighting. And this is what we're seeing in the Middle East. You hit me, I hit you harder. He said, okay, we're going to just stop. You hit us last, we're going to stop. And he said, we're going to take these genociders and we're going to put them through the rule of law. We're not going to allow retaliation. And we're going to do community gacaca courts. And that's why Rwanda was second only to America with a number of prisoners, because they were literally taking them through the courts for 15 years. Now, it's interesting that Rwanda outlawed the death penalty. So even the people who had done all these mass murders said, we will not put you to death. And if you will tell us where the bodies are, and if you will confess and show genuine remorse, we will let you off on community service. This had an amazing unifying factor. I have talked to many, many people who were on the other side in Rwanda, many who are now serving as mayors and governors and things like that. They say, we were won over by the reconciliation rather than the retaliation. It's interesting that when they liberated the country and ended the genocide, the people wanted to make Kagame president. He said, no, I wasn't elected. And he said, it's more important for the Congress, the nation, to be unified than to me be president. And they went and found the vice president of the opposing party, brought him back into the country and reinstalled him. He reinstalled the enemy. Most people don't know this. He reinstalled the enemy as president. And he said, because I wasn't elected, we believe in the rule of law. Now, 8 years later, he was elected in a 92% vote. But what I have found is somehow they figured out how to do to show reconciliation and learn to get along together. And I've actually talked to Benjamin Netanyahu about this. And I told him, I said, I think the model for the Middle East peace is in that country. And so there's a factor there. Now, once the war was ended, and many of the genociders fled into the Congo. Now you had a completely destitute country with nothing rebuilt. Kagame figured out pretty quickly it's going to take everybody being on board to rebuild this place, including the churches. And so he invited me in to start working with that segment of society. And we went through, took thousands, 3,000 or 4,000 pastors through literally 6 years of training, graduated them at the National Amahoro Stadium, the Peace Stadium. He was there, handed them the degrees. And today they see that what we call the three-legged stool. I taught this to him from a speech I did at the Davos World Economic Forum. I've gone to Davos multiple years, and everybody keeps talking about we need public-private partnerships. Everybody says this all the time. To handle all of the major problems, poverty, disease, illiteracy, and corruption, and all, we need public-private partnership. So one day at Davos, I was doing a speech. I said, you guys are two-thirds there. You're close, but no cigar, because you're missing the third leg of the stool. There aren't two sectors of society. There are three. There's a public sector, there's a private sector, and there's a faith sector. A one-legged stool will fall over. A two-legged stool will fall over. It takes three legs to make a society strong. And there aren't just profit and nonprofit, or public and private. There's the faith sector, the public sector, and the private sector. Each of them brings something to the table that the other doesn't have. Governments bring to the table all kinds of things like the ability to set the agenda, national agenda, protect the country, obviously. Somebody's got to build the roads. Somebody's got to have the stoplights and the rules and things like that. And the government has, the Bible talks about a legitimate role for government in society. Business brings to the table things that government and churches don't have. For instance, they often bring expertise. They bring technology. They certainly bring capital. And those are things to be involved in nation building. But the faith sector, churches, mosques, synagogues, they bring at least a dozen things that government and business will never have. In the first place, the church has universal distribution. Even if you had, I have a foundation that's involved in helping people with HIV/AIDS. Okay, and I have literally given maybe $10 million to help people with HIV/AIDS. Even if we had the cure for AIDS right now, you couldn't get it to everybody in the world without the church. Because I can take you to 10 million villages in the world, the only thing in it's church. They don't have a school, they don't have a post office, they don't have a government, they don't have a fire department, they don't have a business, but they got a church. The church is the only truly global organization. Nothing else comes close. Nothing else. Everybody else plays at globalization. The church is in every language, every people group, every village. It is the only social service structure in much of the world. Now, there are 600 million Buddhists in the world. There are 800 million Hindus in the world. There are about 1.5, maybe 1.7 billion Muslims in the world. but there are 2.3 billion Christians. That means the actual number of true atheists and secularists is actually quite small outside of Europe and Manhattan. People who don't think the church has any influence just needs to get out and let me show you the world. Because in most of the world, the health care, the job training, and everything is being done by churches. You take, this is a Catholic school. You take Catholics out of Africa, you just removed 27% of the health care. Boom, it's gone. It's just gone. And so we have universal distribution. The church has far more volunteers than any country. When you think about the church has 2.3 billion people, that means the church is bigger than China. The church is bigger than India. It is the biggest institution, organization, group in the world. And to say, well, you can't do health care, or you can't do poverty, or you can't do education because you're religious is nonsense. There are more, we have far more volunteers than all the other NGOs put together. So we have local credibility. When the genocide hit, let's go back to Rwanda. When the genocide hit Rwanda, all of the NGOs pulled out. All the national, UN pulled out, and of course America wasn't there. Who stayed? The pastors and the priests. Why? Because there's a phrase in Africa: the priest and the pastor sleeps in the same blankets as the villagers. They are there. When people talk about community development, you cannot talk about true community development in the world without talking about the church, because it's the only thing that's in much of the world. So there are a lot of different factors. It's that three-legged stool, and that's a long answer, but Kagame recognized that we could grow much faster, and because the peace plan has been there, as you said, 10% reduction in poverty, 1 million people out of poverty since the peace plan's been there. Let me give you one other example of this. Right before President Bush left office, he did the Global Summit on Malaria. And he asked me to be the closing speaker for it. And I said, okay, I'll do it, but I'll do it if I can bring some pastors from Africa. Because I want to show you how you cannot solve any of the world's major problems without the distribution of the church. So there were about this many people in this meeting. It was an invitation-only thing. And I said, I'll just show you 3 or 4 slides. And so I put up a slide, and I said, this is the nation of Rwanda. It has 10 million people in it. It has 5 provinces: north, south, east, west, and a central like a D.C. We went to the president, said, look, we've got 5 things we do. We promote reconciliation, we equip leaders, we assist the poor, care for the sick, educate the next generation. Tell us what you want done in each province, and we'll work with the churches there to do that. He said, I want you to do health care in the western province because there are 2 million people and 1 doctor. Let that sink in. Now, there were 3 hospitals there, but they weren't staffed. And if you got to that hospital, you were going to see a volunteer. You had to walk your way to the hospital. When you got there, there's no guarantee you were going to actually get any help, and you had to bring your own food and cook it yourself. So I put up a map, and I said, here's the western province of Rwanda. And I said, see these 3 dots? I said, these are the 3 hospitals in the western province of Rwanda. It's a 2 days walk to the nearest hospital. When you get there, there's no guarantee you're going to see a doctor, and you have to bring your own food. And if you're sick and you need the hospital, do you really want to walk 2 days to get to the nearest hospital? I said, now that's better than nothing, but that's not good health care. I said, oh, by the way, 2 of those hospitals, they're Christian hospitals. You wouldn't have 2/3 of health care if it weren't for the church. Here's the next slide. I put up a slide, and it had 18 dots. I said, here are the 18 clinics in western Rwanda. Now, I said, now that's better than hospitals because it's only 1 day walk to a clinic. But I said, if I've been in those clinics, if you've been to clinics in the developing world, you know the clinic usually means a bottle of aspirin on the shelf. I said, I've been in all 18 of those clinics. One of them had a a microscope from about the 1950s and nothing else, no medicine. Another one I went into was about the size of a closet, and a woman was laying on the ground giving birth to a baby, nothing but a roof, and that was called a clinic. But it's better than nothing. I said, now, by the way, of these 18 clinics, 16 of them are church-based. So you wouldn't have those if it weren't for faith-based Christian whatever. I said, now watch this. And I put up the third slide, and it was covered with dots. Dot, 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 dot. I said, here are the 867 churches in the Western Province. Now, where would you like to get your health care? 2 days walk, 1 day's walk, or 5 minutes away? Melinda Gates is sitting on the front row. Melinda comes up and says, Rick, I get it. The church can be the distribution for health care. I said, Melinda, it has for 2,000 years. The audacity of the government telling the church how to do health care. We've been doing it 2,000 years longer than any government. Really. Really. This is a modern invention here, okay? And so I said, I'm going to prove to you that I can do it faster with churches than you can do it with NGOs or with government. So we went back to that thing 2.5 years ago, went back to that province, and I went and I asked people, asked pastors, would any of you like to have your people trained as community healthcare workers? Because you're never going to have a doctor in your village. There simply aren't enough doctors in the world to fill every village. You're going to have, so we're going to have church-based healthcare. Would any of you pastors like to? 18 pastors said yes. So I said, each of you pick 2 people and we're going to train them. 2 Muslim imams came to me and said, would you train us too? I said, of course you will. Of course we will. This is a human issue. It's not a religion issue, healthcare. So they picked 4. So we had 4 Muslims and 36 Christians out of the congregations there. And we trained them in real simple stuff. How to wash your hands. How to boil the water. How to hang the sheets out to dry in the sun so that they're sanitized. How to handle sanitation. And then we started teaching them things like how to dress a wound. How to stitch a wound. How to set a bone. These people were learning so fast. They're not dumb. They just needed training. Within a few months, we're teaching them how to administer antiretroviral drugs for AIDS, ARVs, which are very precise in the protocol. And then we said to those 40, you're each going to get 7 families and you go visit them. You're a doctor. You're making house calls. Those 40, then we took to train 40 more, which became 80. Those 80 we took to train 80 more, which became 160, 320. You can see the exponential growth. I went back to that province last summer. And in 26 months in the stadium, we graduated over 7,000 healthcare workers in a province that had 1 doctor 2 years ago. Okay? Now, that's the power of the church. But here's the problem. I couldn't do that in many countries because the religious liberty restrictions are, we don't let churches do that. And so there's a fundamental issue of those kind of things can only happen if freedom allows you to get to it. And that's why I was making the point about my religion is more than just my worship. My religion is caring for the poor and the sick and the orphan and the sex trafficking and all these different people.
I just want to acknowledge my colleague Catherine Marshall, who is also part of the Berkley Center, who's run an entire project for many years documenting the huge impact of faith-based institutions in this area, in health and a whole variety of sectors. And just for the record, Rwanda has lower restrictions on religion that has a higher level of religious freedom than many European countries, such as France, Germany, or the UK. In other words, there's an environment that enables faith-based institutions to operate
let me, since you're on Rwanda, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, but one of the complaints right now is that they are limiting freedom of speech. I've heard this, and it's been reported in papers in Europe and in America. It's a limitation on freedom of speech. In the last election, there was a candidate who was a genocide denier running for presidency, okay? And they were saying the genocide didn't really happen. It didn't really happen. In Rwanda, it's against the law to deny the genocide. And so that person was removed and actually put in prison. People say, oh, that's religious, your political restriction. Well, that's the pot calling the kettle black, because in 17 European countries, it's against the law to deny the Holocaust. So it's pretty disingenuous for France to say, you're limiting freedom of speech when it's against the law to deny the Holocaust in France or the Netherlands or Germany or Poland or 17 other countries. So we're holding an African country to a standard that even Europeans don't keep. It's not fair. That's all I'll say about that.
What lessons do you think the Rwandan experience has for our foreign policy or for other countries concerning religious freedom? You've just talked about the developmental impact that religious freedom can have.
Let me switch off of Rwanda. Let's choose another country. But a number of years ago, I had a couple in my church, Denny and Betsy Cohan, who he was a businessman, she was an attorney, and they were going to China to teach business and law in Peking University. Peking University is the only thing still called Peking in Beijing. It is the Harvard of China. It has 50,000 students. It is all the communist leadership. If you're going to go up and you're trained at Peking University. It's where you get the training, 50,000 students. By the way, it's the only school that has a Center for the Study of Christianity. None of them are Christians, but they're studying, Christian. There's a Calvinist scholar, and so we went and had a great time discussing with them. While I was there, the government invited me for state dinner. I actually invited members of the communist leadership to Saddleback maybe 15 years ago. Never told my people, never told the press, and never told the government. And they came to China because they had invited us in, and we had sent them some books, and they said, and this Denny and Betsy Cohen said, would you like to go to Saddleback Church? I said, sure, we'd love to. So I invited them. I cooked them a barbecue in my backyard and served them ribs. And so then they sent me a letter, said, we're giving you carte blanche in China. We trust you. So all my books are above ground, and I can go anywhere. I don't have any restrictions there. Anyway, I've had 2 state dinners in China. In one of those dinners, I got into a debate with one of the, it's not the Politburo, but whatever the corollary term is for China, about why you need religious freedom. And I told him, I said, you want the economic success of the West without the moral and ethical foundations underneath it, the Judeo-Christian heritage on which it is built. And I said, you want economic freedom, but you don't want freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of information. It isn't going to happen. And I said, what will happen is it's the cut flower syndrome. You'll have the flower, you cut off the roots, and then the flower is going to die. And I said, if you impose capitalism without a Christian moral basis, capitalism without Christianity is flat out greed. It's Christianity that teaches us to take care of your employees, treat people right, pay a good wage, and things like that. And I said, if you try to pull capitalism here without a moral basis underneath it, you're going to do what happened in Russia. You just change the communist Politburo for a bunch of oligarchs. You train one group of thugs for another. So you have to have that moral and ethical basis underneath it. And if we take that out from our society, we are cutting off the roots, and the flower will inevitably fade.
So we've been to Rwanda and China, and I want to bring us back to America. And as you were saying earlier, there are rising challenges concerning religious liberty here, controversies, debates, and everybody is familiar with these. For example, there's a big domestic battle involving religious freedom with respect to the HHS mandate. Yeah. And some people see this battle as a fight about contraception, with the Catholic bishops on one side and mainstream public opinion on the other. How do you see this HHS mandate debate? You're not a Catholic.
I'm not a Catholic, and I don't have a problem with contraception, but I stand 100% in solidarity with my Catholic brothers and sisters to practice what they believe. If they made a law next month that said all Jewish delis in Manhattan have to sell pork, I would be out in front picketing and protesting with that rabbi, willing to go to jail with that rabbi, because why? Pork's not illegal. You can get pork anywhere. It's not like it's a controlled substance. Why would you force Jews, or Muslims don't eat pork either, to sell pork when you can get it free anywhere else? It's not like contraceptives are hard to get. You can get them free anywhere. Why would I force someone who has a conviction against it, say, you must do this? That doesn't make sense to me. Right now, they've been debating this idea in San Francisco, city of San Francisco, to outlaw circumcision. Because in some people's mind, a parent does not have a right to make a religious decision for a baby. Now, you can kill them, you can abort them, but you can't make a religious decision for them. To me, that doesn't make sense. If today they say no circumcision, tomorrow they could say no baptism. That's why, as people of faith, of all faiths, whether you're Muslim or any faith, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, this is an issue that we have to stay together on. If a school district tells me that a Muslim girl can't wear a headscarf to school, I'm going to oppose that rule. Because if they say she can't wear a headscarf to school, tomorrow they're going to say I can't wear a cross and carry a Bible.
What do you say to people, Rick, though, who say that those kinds of arguments just turn religious freedom into a special set of privileges and protections just for religious people? And anyway, those privileges have to be balanced by assertions of other rights. The right to access to contraceptive services, the right to same-sex marriage, the right to abortion. Okay, well, first place, I'll go back and say I believe that the right to religious freedom, or the right to believe what I want to believe, is the fundamental right on which all others are built. Because if I don't have the right to believe and practice what I believe, I'll say it again, the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, those are worthless. It all starts with, do I have the right to have a conscious moral decision to make that decision? And it is not a minor issue. People keep trying to frame this as the war on women, and I'll tell you, whoever frames the debate wins. Okay? And I intend to oppose that. Because it's not about these issues. Are some rights more important than others? Yes. I'm sorry, yes. The freedom to believe what I believe is what America was founded on. It wasn't founded on whether I believe in contraception or don't believe in contraception. That's a secondary issue. And it's a subtle change that gets it away from the fundamental issue. You know, one of the big issues this last year was the Hosanna Tabor case, where I believe it was a Lutheran school that said, we believe that we should be able to hire only people who believe like us. The administration said, no, you're wrong, and instructed the Justice Department to go after that and to prosecute it. It went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, 9-0, voted in favor of religious liberty. I think that is a telling case that even whether you are conservative or liberal on anything, you have to stand up for religious liberty. And the worst thing that would happen would be if religious liberty became a code word for one side or the other. For liberals or conservatives or
Republicans or Democrats, that would be a disastrous effect on our country, is that that's the only party that cares about religious freedom. That would be a fatal mistake on the party that doesn't support the first freedom of America. Nobody should let anybody else take it from me. If I truly believe in religious freedom, it means I let you do things that I totally disagree with, because I believe in freedom more than I believe in me controlling your behavior, something like that. And on this particular issue, as I said, it's not illegal. I mean, I could understand if, for instance, contraceptives were illegal and you couldn't get them free anywhere, but you can. It's just not true. You can get them free at all kinds of free clinics. So why would I force a certain group of people who have a personal conviction about it? It's not my conviction, but it's their conviction. Then I support you in that conviction on that. And it's something that we have to look much deeper and not let people say, oh, well, it's about this or it's about that. It's not. There is a fundamental first freedom issue at stake here.
Some people, though, say that many of the advocates for religious freedom now have been guilty of ignoring or downplaying threats to the religious freedom of non-Christian Americans. After all, America has seen a rising tide of Islamophobia in some places, with some communities, local communities, trying to prevent Muslim Americans from opening mosques. There was a case in Tennessee, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, not that long ago. There was a horrific attack on a Sikh temple in Wisconsin last year. Do American Christians need to do more to defend the religious liberty of non-Christian Americans?
American Christians need to repent. They need to repent on their not standing up for the freedoms of other religions. It goes back to, what do we believe about the nature of man? What do we believe about the nature of God? What do we believe about the nature of faith? And what do we believe about the Constitution in our particular case? One of the things we have to realize is that all governments, every government, is created by believers, sustained by believers, and run by believers. You say, what? Because everybody believes something. There's really no such thing as a non-believer. Everybody believes something. I have friends who are atheists. They believe something. It is psychologically impossible to be an unbeliever. You have to believe something. You cannot live in life without believing something. So my worldview is literally just that. It's a worldview. It's a worldview, granted, I willingly admit, it's based on my believing that the Bible is the inerrant Word of God, that God says it. And I willingly say, your worldview may not be based on the Bible. Fine, but you got a worldview, and you're a believer. So the issue here is not between faith and rationality. It's between one belief system and another belief system. Let's just be honest. Everybody is a believer. And going back to what I believe we need in America is the free market of ideas, where I support your idea and your right to believe what you want to believe, even though if I completely disagree with it. And you would support my belief, even if I completely disagree with it. Most of the social changes in society were done by Christian believers here in America. The civil rights movement was led by pastors. It wasn't led by politicians. That is a myth. It was led by pastors. Women's right to vote was not led by politicians. It was led by pastors. Okay, the child labor laws, led by pastors. And so the revisionism of history of saying we can't have faith at the table because it's faith, everybody has faith. I may have faith in myself, but it's a faith. I may have faith in science, but it's a faith. I may have faith in whatever. So this is not a debate between believers and unbelievers. This is a debate between an America that has countless numbers of different kinds of believers.
I want to just go back to the HHS mandate controversy for a moment, and in particular I want to raise the issue of how this affects faith-based hospitals and faith-based social service agencies. In your peace plan, P-E-A-C-E, the A stands for Assist the Poor, and some groups, such as the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, have argued that the rising challenges to religious freedom imperil or weaken the ability of faith communities to do just that, assist the poor. Do you agree with that assessment? Is there a danger of that?
Here's what's interesting. Looking at it from a global view, is because I've been overseas most of the last 10 years in these different places, there's a growing resentment against America against its new form of colonialism based on belief. Classic liberalism used to say, when we're doing something overseas, we do not impose American values. That's classic liberalism. We don't bring in we don't tell them Western culture. We value their culture. We let their culture be what it needs to be. And we don't impose our Western cultural values on others. That's classic liberalism. Liberalism doesn't believe that anymore. All around the world, I hear people saying, America's telling us, you can't get our money unless you have this view about abortion, you have this view about homosexuality, you have this view about some other moral or ethical issue, and the strings are tied. And I can't tell you how many countries I've been in, and people said, well, forget you, America, because you're not going to determine our values by buying them. That is a fundamental shift that's happened just in my lifetime. Where it used to be, we'd say, let them do their thing. But now it's, you can't have our aid unless you, and I have seen it, maybe 50 countries. So that's a big issue.
Well, Pastor Warren, we have a big congregation here, and we've got people who are eager to get into the conversation. We've got microphones, or a microphone in the front here, and I'd ask you, if you want to ask a question, please, will we have people make their way to the microphone, is that right? Okay, yeah, so we've got 2 microphones, so just make your way forward. If you want to ask your question, please identify yourself. Try to make your question brief. We've got hopefully lots of people who want to ask a question. Before we start taking questions, let me just ask you another question, Rick, and it relates to what you were saying just a moment ago about the role of pastors and religious leaders in public life. There seems to be a very American tradition of faith-inspired civic engagement, as you were saying, but I wonder if we're reaching an inflection point, Rick, in the relationship between faith and public life. Some recent polls show a lot of increases in the number of Americans who have no religious affiliation. Other polls show a lot of Americans are rethinking the role of churches in public life. For example, according to a Pew survey last year, 54% of Americans say that churches should keep out of politics. That's a solid majority, compared with 40% who say religious institutions should express their views on social and political matters. As recently as 1996, those numbers were reversed. The majority in 96 said churches should be involved, and only a minority said they shouldn't. Are we seeing a hostility to the role that you've wanted the church to play in public life?
Let me make 2 different comments on that. First, anytime you see a survey, you should ask to see the wording of the question. Because you can make a survey say anything depending on how you want to frame the question. Whoever frames the question sets the agenda. For instance, I read in the Pew survey, and then it was reported in the Times and the Post and everywhere else, that the number of Protestants in America has plummeted precipitously. Well, yeah, because I don't know anybody who calls themselves Protestant anymore. That's like saying the number of pilgrims has dropped precipitously in America. Now, are there still Reformed Christians? Like, the number of Puritans has dropped precipitously. Are there Puritans in America? Sure. They're called Presbyterians today. But they're not called Puritans. And so to say the number of Puritans has dropped precipitously, nobody uses that term. If you were to come to Saddleback Church and asked the 120,000 names on our church roll, are you a Protestant? Not one of them would say, I'm a Protestant. We don't use that term. Why? Because we stopped protesting against the Catholic Church, started working with them years ago. Okay? We're all on the same team, man. Okay? So why would I want to be a Protestant since I have nothing to protest in the Catholic Church? They're my brothers. They're my brothers. So people today, Protestants call themselves evangelicals. They call themselves charismatic. They call themselves Christian. I can give you a dozen other terms. So it's like you're saying Protestantism has dropped in America. Well, of course, because nobody calls himself that anymore, or very few do. So that's an important thing. But going back to this thing about, I believe in the separation of church and state. I do not believe in the separation of faith and politics, because faith is simply a worldview. It's simply a belief. And you're saying, my belief is not acceptable at the table, but your belief is? All beliefs should be acceptable at the table, okay? If a Wiccan has a belief, that Wiccan should be acceptable at the table. And if their view gets heard, congratulations, okay? And if it gets, maybe you got the best idea on health care. Fine, we go with the Wiccan program. So, you know what I'm saying? It's like, so everybody has a worldview, so you can't say nobody with a worldview is welcome. Okay, so I believe in separation of church and state, but I believe in it in the way that Jefferson believed in it. Now, Jefferson was by no means an Orthodox Christian. But Jefferson didn't even invent the phrase separation of church and state. Roger Williams did, the founder of Rhode Island, the Baptist. And Jefferson borrowed it. There are two famous letters by Jefferson. Two. One, of course, is the one to the Danbury Baptist, where he talks about the phrase, separation of church and state is not in the Constitution, it's in Jefferson's letter. And he talks about the separation of church and state, saying to the Baptist, we're not going to let the Anglicans control you. It was a protection, okay? That's what it was about. It was, we're going to protect the church from the government. It didn't mean the church, no Christian idea could be shared in the public square. So he wrote that. But Jefferson also wrote a second letter, which is just as famous, but most people probably haven't heard of it, so it's not as famous, I guess. And it's the letter to the Methodist Episcopals of Connecticut. And in that letter, he says, the government has no right whatsoever in matters of conscience, in matters of religion, in matters of faith. I personally own that letter. If I were to sell it today, it'd be worth over $1 million. I bought it at a rare dealership because that's how much I care about this issue. And it's in Jefferson's handwriting. The government has no right in matters of conscience and faith and religion. When Jefferson wrote the famous separation of church and state letter, he wrote it on a Friday. That Sunday, he went to church in the largest church in D.C., which met in the U.S. Capitol. And he went there for the next 7 years. You're telling me we had a church in the U.S. Capitol? Yes, we did. For years and years and years. We had a church meeting in a government building? Yes, we did. And Jefferson went there for 7 years. So his understanding of church and state is not the way people are interpreting it today.
Thank you, Rick. You've been very patient. Yeah, please.
As a Catholic employee at World Vision, I'm doubly grateful that you're speaking up on issues of religious liberty.
Did you just identify yourself?
Nathaniel Hurd. I work for World Vision. In 1994, evangelicals and Catholics together envisioned evangelicals and Catholics coming together and working on some of the compelling issues of the day, religion, religious liberty, marriage, family life, and other issues. In your judgment, how can evangelicals and Catholics work better over the coming years on issues of religious liberty?
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, it's pretty simple. Focus on the majors, not the minors. The stuff we have in common far more unites us than the differences that we have. It's like family disagreement on the other issues. But I also would say that even not just Catholics and evangelicals, we have to use, I love the term that Francis Schaeffer used to call it co-belligerency. Co-belligerency means I can work with other people who I disagree with on issues that we actually agree on. So not just other Christians like Catholics and evangelicals and charismatics working together, but Muslims and Mormons and atheists or whoever are willing to work on issues. For instance, I don't agree with a lot of the agenda of the National Organization of Women. But if they want to work on the elimination of pornography and the objectification of a woman's body, I'm in. I'm a co-belligerent. I will work with any national association, organization of women any day on ending the objectification and the abuse of women and sex trafficking. I'm in. We don't agree on other stuff, but I'm in. It's pretty widely known that Kay and I have given a lot of our attention and a lot of our money to help people dying of HIV/AIDS or living with HIV/AIDS all around the world. I work with gay groups all around the world to end AIDS. My gay friends don't agree with me on everything I believe about my definition of marriage. I don't agree with them. But you know what? On ending AIDS, we're co-belligerents. We can work together. This is an important thing, and it goes back to the issue of civility, of can not just Christians work together, can everybody work together? And on this issue, I don't see why liberals and conservatives wouldn't join together and say, we're going to preserve the First Amendment. Who's against the First Amendment?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for coming. My name is Laura. I'm an undergraduate at Georgetown. And as a Jewish student in a Catholic university, religious freedom has meant a lot to me and has really redefined the last couple of years that I've spent here. Yeah. You mentioned a lot of the wonderful work that the Peace Organization has done to help combat AIDS and HIV all across the world. And you mentioned sort of briefly, and I thought very diplomatically, your views on contraception. And I was wondering if you could speak at least briefly to the role that you think that public or Catholic or Christian organizations, especially in DC, which has the highest rate of HIV/AIDS, especially amongst young people, what that role is when we know that contraception can be such a huge preventative of HIV/AIDS, what the role of the wonderful Christian organizations who are helping provide healthcare, what their role is and how they need to view contraception in a 21st century mentality.
Good question, very good question.
Thank you.
When you're working together on a common goal, and you have people who can't go with you all the way, or you're not willing to go all the way that they are, you let them go as far as they can go. For instance, I don't know, probably 8 years ago, Jack DeGioia, invited us, me, and a group of others, there were, I think, 12 of us, here to talk about an interfaith response to AIDS. And we had 3 Jewish rabbis, 3 Muslim imams, 3 Catholic priests, and 3 evangelical pastors. This sounds like a joke, doesn't it? They all walk into a bar together. and so we're sitting around the room, okay, and we say, okay, now, obviously we don't all agree on salvation. We pretty much probably agree on most ethical stuff. We don't agree on salvation. So let's talk about what we do agree on. Okay. So I start the conversation. How many of us would agree that if people reserved sex for marriage, that it would probably reduce the occurrences of AIDS in the world? Every hand went up. Bingo. How do we work on that one? Why don't we work on promoting marriage? Okay. I remember it was hilariously, I think one of the priests raised his hand and said, well, I just read a report that said in South Africa they have discovered that the occurrences of AIDS goes down when men are circumcised. The Jews said, we're in. And other hands went up in the room too. And so the point is, you work where you can, okay? In Tanzania is a country we're working in, and we've been reducing AIDS there. Or Nigeria, or I just can name all kinds of countries. When I'm with a Catholic brother or a Catholic sister, and they say, we just can't support condoms. Fine. then you go as far as you can in that. And I'm not asking you to change your conviction on that, and I'm not saying I can't work with you because you can't go everywhere I can go. Does that make sense? It's like I'm saying you let people work together where you can, and where you can't, there are some things that certain other groups would do. I'd say I can't go there, but I'll work with you this far.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Hi, my name is Christopher Rodriguez. I'm studying abroad from California.
How are you?
If I first may say thank you for your books.
From California.
Right.
Welcome.
That foreign country, you're out of California. Right? That's exactly right. Do you have your passport?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know. Well, I mean, you need it with the difference in weather.
The land of the fruits and nuts.
Thank you for your book. Me and my dad have loved it.
That wasn't very nice.
Well, I'm California. Yeah.
We're all mean over there. I mean, if you look at our freeways, like, we're just mean to each other. So, and thank you to Georgetown definitely for putting this on. This is a wonderful event. My question is a bit of a paradoxical question. In the Western tradition, we pursue objective truths, and one of the things that we've come to learn in our history is that ideas have consequences.
Yeah.
Certainly our beliefs have consequences. How do we wrestle with other belief systems that are not just different on issues, but certainly Middle Eastern faiths that are against our faith, to the point where part of the nature of our relationship is hostility. So that's kind of the question. How do we deal with that paradox?
Well, I'd say read Oz's book on civility. The issue is that we have to learn to disagree agreeably. And our civilization is actually losing its civility. And we got to learn, you got to learn how to put your point across without being cross. A lot of times you have to say, can we walk together without seeing eye to eye? Yeah, I think we can. And you go where you can in that. I do believe that there are some things that are absolutely truth. I believe in the original meaning of tolerance. Tolerance used to mean that even though we violently disagree, I'm going to treat you with dignity, and I'm going to treat you with respect. I have a right to disagree with you. I do not have a right to be rude to you. That's an important thing. You have a right to disagree with me. You do not have a right to be rude to me. You should treat me with dignity, and I should treat you with dignity, even in the free exchange of ideas. And so what I say as a Christian pastor is, I believe in the good news and in the common good. I believe in both of those factors. I believe in the good news. I believe Jesus Christ was who he said he was, the Son of God, who died on the cross for the redemption of my sin, rose again 3 days later, and will come back someday and will take me to heaven as I put my trust in him by grace through faith. I believe in historic Christian doctrine. But I also believe in the common good. And we're in America. And in a democracy, nobody wins all the time. For instance, I happen to be pro-life. It's not the law of the land right now. I haven't left the country. I'm still here. Okay. I don't agree with that law, but I haven't left the country. And so the issue is, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but you do the best you can, and you move forward, and as in Augustine said, in all things, charity.
I've been given the 3-minute warning, so let's try to get as many as we can here. Right. Yes, please.
Hi. Thank you, Rick. My name is Nermeen Rayad. I'm the Executive Director of Coptic Orphans, an organization working in Egypt. And my question is, your thoughts on the role of the American church in regards to the declining population of Christianity in the Middle East. Yeah. Egypt being a case in point, started out predominantly Christian country by the 13th, 14th century, down to 50% now, 10%. We're still better than Finland, where there are only 3% churchgoers, so Egypt is a Christian country compared to Finland. What is the American church is doing?
Let me answer that in 2 ways. First, because you talked about orphans. I believe this deeply. Orphans don't need orphanages. They need families. Orphanages is an American Western-style institutional approach to children. They don't need, I've never met, there are 136 million orphans in the world. They don't need, I've never met an orphan who wants an orphanage. They want a family. There are enough Christians in the world to take care of all the orphans. If you got 2.3 billion Christians, that ought to be able to care for 136 million orphans, not counting anybody else who would adopt too. So we really emphasize adoption. I may be one of the few churches in America that has 3 full-time staff just for adoption. At Saddleback Church, we have a goal of our members adopting 1,000 orphans. We're already over the 500 mark. 500 of our families have already adopted. So that's an important thing. And of those 136 million orphans out there, whoever gets to them first is going to have their loyalty. If we get to them first and we love them, they will grow up learning to be loving. If a terrorist gets to them first, they'll grow up to be a terrorist. Whoever gets to them first so the orphan issue is an important issue, particularly, I think, in the Middle East, because there are 2 reasons why I think Christianity has declined there. Or, there are multiple reasons. I'm going to just say 2. But let me give you 2. One of them is the politicalization of Christianity. And for much of the world, Christianity, particularly during President Bush administration, and President Bush was a friend of mine, but everybody knew he was, quote, an evangelical. So then evangelical means, well, you must support this war, or you must support, and evangelical became a political term instead of a theological term. Now, if a person in the Middle East looks at America and he says, America is a, quote, Christian nation, and I only see 2 things coming out of it. An incredibly debauched, pornographic lifestyle, which I'm seeing in the Hollywood movies, and an authoritative, we're going to control the world any way we want to, I would resent both of those too. And if that's my only view of Christianity, is a political view or a Hollywood view, then I don't really know what a real Christian means. It's going to take somebody coming in and simply loving them, serving a cup of cold water in their name. In places where people are resistant to the gospel, we must start with the acts of charity, not our words. If people like what they see, they will listen to what we say.
Thank you, Rick. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Jay Kansar. I'm with the Hindu American Foundation. Thank you for your... And my question is, what is your perspective as a proponent of church-state separation of U.S. federal aid money going to large, primarily evangelical organizations who are doing social development work in developing countries, but that have the first priority of conversion, and under that banner they do social development work, but they are getting federal taxpayer money.
Any organization whose first priority is evangelization should never take a penny from the government. It's why I have never taken a penny from the government. I've been offered millions of dollars in grants for the peace plan. Literally, everybody was throwing them at me. And both this administration and the previous, take this money. You're doing so much good. You're helping people. And I'm going, you don't understand. I'm doing this because I love Jesus Christ. And I'm sorry, I cannot not talk about him. So I'm not going to take your money. So I have refused all money for that very reason. On the other hand, there are some legitimate things that can be done by faith-based organizations that aren't about evangelism. And I think that's perfectly fine. For instance, I would fund a religious Celebrate Recovery program any day over a government program of recovery because it works better. It has a track record, and when you look at empirically based results, years ago we started a program at Saddleback called Celebrate Recovery. And it is a faith-based recovery program. It is now used in every prison system in America, every single one of them. Why? Because it works better than anybody else's. And there was one example is on the front page of the New York Times, where they gave a story of the Sierra prison in Northern California, 6,000 maximum security students, inmates, students. That's Georgetown. Sorry, I forgot about that. Maximum security students. This prison was so violent, they had never gone more than 2 days without a lockdown. Never more than 2 days. And one of the guys named Danny Duchesne, who was a lifer, he was involved in a murder, a robbery resulted in 2 deaths. They put him in prison for life. 6 months after he went to prison, he gave his life to Christ, became a Christian believer. He spent the next 20 years as a Christian believer in prison. He'll never get out. And he wrote me, he said, could we do 40 Days of Purpose, the program we do at Saddleback? I said, sure. So I sent him all of the stuff, and I said, you got to put people in groups. So he went around, he knocked on every door in the prison and said, would you like to study the purpose of life? And 186 prisoners said, yeah. Inmates said, yeah. So he got them together and he said, now Rick says we have to meet in little groups. So we're going to have these things called cell groups. Get it? Cell groups. They started, that thing grew to, had an amazing thing. I won't go into all the details. We started Celebrate Recovery out of that. New York Times reported on the front page that since they'd done Celebrate Recovery and Purpose-Driven Life, they've gone 6.5 years without a lockdown. Now, the president, I mean, the warden came to me, came down and met me and said, what have you done to my prison? I said, that's a change that only God can make. So there's some things, that's a good thing.
Well, fellow prisoners, we have to bring this conversation to a close. Thank you all very much. We have to end this conversation, but we will be continuing the conversation about religious freedom through the work of the Religious Freedom Project on the web and future events and our research. Thank you all, and thank you, Rick Warren.
I wanted to say, if you're not following me on Twitter, you're going to hell. Okay, so just get on there and follow me.
On that note, thank you, Rick.